Hey, Doug.
Ho.
You know, there comes a time in a man's life when he looks around and he goes, I need a friend. And, I don't know, maybe someone out there is friends to all, is a friend, a universal friend, if you will. Here's the thing. I don't even know what I'm talking about because Uncle Mark hasn't told us.
Yeah, we don't have enough information to even fake an opening here.
Yeah,
no.
I've kept this pretty secret because this is an unusual one, guys. This is interesting, and as this will be airing, this is our first show of Pride Month in June.
Oh yeah,
I thought there's some queer stories in religious history, believe it or not, and not all of them ended up on fire. So I think. This is kind of a queer story, and it's a really fascinating one. So, and as Dan was saying, in times like these, we could all use a friend, right? Lord knows I could use a couple more. And today I want to talk about, well, a pretty damn fascinating friend, one that I had surprisingly never heard of until very recently, and that is the public universal friend, also known as the All Friend, the Comforter, Friend of Sinners, the Friend, or PUF. Went by all those names. Now, you may be confused, saying in bewilderment, Uncle Mark, yours is a skeptical religious critique podcast. What in the world are you doing talking about the admittedly wonderful but off-topic fisherman's friend? That being the soothing lozenges developed for hardy, chapped fisher folk in England in 1865. We love those and rely on them in good times and bad, but what gives? And I say no. No, silly listener.
That was what I was saying. Just to be clear, I was thinking
lozenges. The public universal friend was nothing like a lozenge. And then, yes, you might be saying that's no lozenge, but you must surely be talking about the children's friend, the terrible, shaming Mormon publication for children that went by that name from 1909 until it changed its name to simply The Friend in 1970. The magazine with games and stories about how children should hate their sinful bodies and always obey white male authority. Seriously, no, come on, confused listener. The public universal friend was a real actual person, and a very fascinating one at that. Please switch to your favorite lozenge and propagandist children's magazine podcast for that other stuff. So, that established. The public
By the way,
universal...
I do recommend Lozenge Cast. It is... it's a great show.
It's amazing the variety of lozenges they cover.
Oh my God!
But they sound like they have throat problems. I don't know what these things are. So the public universal friend was the name of an eccentric preacher that sprung into the public eye in 1776 in New England. Having come out of the Quaker tradition, the friend began to travel around the region on horseback in the lead of up to dozens of mounted followers at a given time. For the longest time, the friend and followers didn't have their own meeting house, so would ask to borrow others or simply meet for the friend's sermons out in the great outdoors. And as the Quakers were an accommodating sort of folk, for a while they were happy to lend their spaces to this intriguing preacher and their flock. Now, like I said, I had never heard of the public universal friend until I read an excerpt from Adam Morris's book American Messiahs, which I bought and am now currently reading voraciously. So a lot of this info comes from there, as well as a variety of somewhat contradictory online sources, and you'll understand the contradictory parts in just a bit. So the public universal friend was basically preaching out of the typical Quaker playbook: general pacifism, seeing all men and women as brothers and sisters in Christ, abolition of slavery, etc. The friend...
I hate to interrupt, but the Quakers themselves called themselves the Society of Friends.
That's right. That's right. So
they've got a history of friendship there.
They absolutely do, and that's kind of where the public universal friend found the inspiration for the name and
right.
The sensibility. So the friend rejected the idea of predestination and believed in universal salvation. The friend successfully convinced many followers that had slaves to free them, and many free black people joined the group, which was by now known as the Society of Universal Friends. So far, so good, right?
Okay.
So the public friend was, like so many other religious ecstatics caught up in the fervor of early America's various great awakenings, was a big believer in utopian communal living. The Society of Universal Friends, air quotes, bought rural land in the far west of New York. And I say bought in air quotes because they paid money for it, but it wasn't to the indigenous people that actually owned it. But this is America, so yeah, actually they got caught up in kind of a huge swindle. But they founded the settlements of Gore and Jerusalem, New York.
How do you spell Gore?
Gore. I don't know why they called it Gore.
All right.
But they built houses and got about sawing wood and churning butter. It was 1790. That's what you did. So by now the Quakers had long been over the Friend and the Society of Universal Friends. They found the Friend far too arrogant a person for their liking. The Friend's insistence on almost total abstinence, even in marriage, an institution the Friend was also pretty against, was bizarre by the standards of the day. They also balked at the Friend's insistence that they were the embodiment of Christ's spirit, which was heretical at best. So that gets us close to what makes the Public Universal Friend so fascinating. All the basic Quaker preachy stuff, who cares really? Doesn't matter. The Public Universal Friend, as I imagine you've guessed by now, was not born with that name. No, the Friend was born in Cumberland, Rhode Island in 1752 and was named Jemima Wilkinson.
Oh, interesting.
So Jemima was a gifted child, an avid reader, and was able to quote huge sections of the Bible by heart. In fact, when later, as the Public Universal Friend, they would never carry a Bible with them into sermons, it was all from memory, right? She was the 8th of 12 children in a fairly well-to-do family. Wow. But in October of 1776, Jemima became gravely ill. They speculate that it was typhus, and the family was pretty much ready to bury her as her fever raged for days and days and days. So, somehow she recovered, but that's not how the Friend would say it exactly. According to the Friend's own account, the spirit of Jemima Wilkinson did depart the body it was born into. Essentially, she died. And into that body, God deposited a new spirit, one the Friend would later describe as the Spirit of Christ. Important distinction. They did not mean the ghost of Jesus of Nazareth, but something bigger, more, universal, the idea of Christ, I guess you could say.
Huh.
But from that moment of, air quotes, resurrection, the person formerly known as Jemima Wilkinson would be known to themselves and the world as the Public Universal Friend, would reject gendered pronouns almost always, preferring he, him, if they ever did use gendered pronouns, which was on a rare occasion, and chose to present on the male side of androgyny for the rest of their lives.
Interesting.
Wow.
Super fascinating, right? Now, I realized that by bringing up the Friend's pre-transition name that I, by modern standards, was dead naming them. And I considered how to tell this very interesting story without doing that, which is not easy. But scholars and historians disagree on how to address the Friend in this category. The book I'm reading right now, which was just published this year, the author argues for the use of male pronouns and uses male pronouns for the Friend. But a lot of trans historian, the trans historian I read about it, does not, prefers gender neutral pronouns. So, was the Public Universal Friend trans, or were they rejecting the gender binary entirely, therefore being non-binary? Was their change in identity merely the result of a fever-induced hallucinatory religious experience, or was the religious experience cover for their dysphoria and desire to transition to their authentic self? Considering these were not even terms or fields of understanding in 1776, how can we even begin to understand this person and their motivation?
Right.
So, interestingly, the Public Universal Friend is not actually the first known American trans or non-binary person of European descent, according to historians. That distinction may go to Thomas and or Thomasine Hall, a British emigre who worked as a servant in Jamestown and whose refusal to stick to one mode of gender expression and possible dalliances with both men and women set off quite a firestorm in the very progressive year of 1629. And lest I participate in erasure, there were a variety of fully accepted gender expressions and sexualities in indigenous societies long before the white folk arrived and set about ruining everything.
True.
If you want to dig deeper, there is evidence of what we today would call trans, non-binary, intersex, and gender fluid people in various positions in societies globally, with the oldest evidence we have in the Mediterranean dating back almost 9,000 years. So really, the Public Universal Friend was hardly novel historically, but most surely must have seemed like a Martian to the sensibilities of the very uptight slaveholding colonial Americans of the time. And most of the contemporary critique of the Friend was centered on their highly unusual expression and nonconformity. Surprise, surprise. So, the Public Universal Friend died in 1819 at the age of 66. Their followers, turning out mostly to be women who refused to live by the suffocating standards of the day, were assiduous throughout their life to respect the Friend's identity and expression, which I think is kind of amazing for the America of 244 years ago, no?
Yeah.
Right.
So, sadly or not, the Society of Universal Friends eventually petered out around 1860, partly because the loss of such a fascinating and charismatic leader, but also the near total celibacy didn't help their numbers too much either.
Yeah. That's a tough one. That's a tough sell.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad if stats are important to you.
Yeah.
You got to let people fuck. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But here is another amazing early American religious fact I did not know when it comes to all things gender nonconforming. This other religious movement is worthy of its own segment another time, but I'll kind of mention it briefly here. In 1774, just 2 years before the Public Universal Friend first declared themselves, another unlikely prophet landed on American shores, and her name was Ann Lee. Not Ang Lee, the amazing Chinese film director, of course, but Ann Lee, a British immigrant that was known as Mother Ann to her followers, the Shakers. So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
it's certainly rare enough that two self-proclaimed contemporary prophets in the same very religious, very conservative place and time would be, well, not men. And Mother Ann's story and that of the Shakers are not only fascinating in their own rights as well, but there are a ton of parallels between the formerly Quakers, the Friend, and Mother Ann's practice of their own version of Reformed Quakery, which is a word I just made up. But in my reading, there was a nugget about the Shaker divinity and cosmology that astonished me. Although sort of borrowed from the earlier obscure theology of Jacob Boehme, the Shakers believed that both men and women are made in God's image, because God is both male and female simultaneously.
Whoa.
As we were meant to be before the fall in the Garden of Eden, and will be again if we live a life of total piety and absolute abstinence, which to me is like, wow.
Yeah.
So, ignore the bullshit and damaging narrative of the Garden of Eden and original sin and blaming/shaming Eve/all women forever for tricking dumbass Adam into a single serving of fruit, which is just part of a balanced breakfast after all, and rewind to the totally androgynous and intersex nature of the Shaker version of the Christian God in mid-18th century America. Didst I just blow ye minds, good fellows?
Well, and what's crazy about that too is not far in time or space from both of these movements was born another American religion.
Oh, more than one.
The Joseph Smith and Mormonism was not far away in time or space from these people, but theologically was in another galaxy, right?
Yeah, and the
Right.
Adventists came out of the same clay.
Right.
Well, here's the thing that fascinates me. You tell me about two people who founded religions who were not, at very least, not assigned male at birth.
That's right.
And they're the one, like every man who starts a religion, controls everybody's sex, but does it in such a way that he gets to fuck as many people as he wants to.
Yes.
But these people who were not men starting in these religions, or at least not assigned male at birth, are all going, no sex for anybody.
Yeah, stop it. It's
Nobody gets to do it.
It's true. Like pretty much every cult we've talked about, every dangerous cult and weird religion we've talked about, is sex is one of the primary kind of drivers behind the foundation.
Right.
These are completely the opposite. So, anyway, to conclude, for a brief shining moment, in of all times the American Revolution, very serious, very religious, real challenges to the idea of the gender binary had just a bit of a buckled toehold right in the midst of the revolutionary struggle. It seems both the Friend and Mother Ann were aware of each other, but there's no evidence they ever met. Yes, both the Public Universal Friends and Mother Ann's movements withered away. There are no more followers of the Universal Friend. And as far as I can tell, there are exactly 2 Shakers left alive. But can you imagine how different American Christianity might be, especially in relation to gender and queer issues, if the seeds these 2 had planted took root rather than that of the patriarchal, hyper-conservative, hideous Protestantism, the evangelical Protestantism that we're stuck dealing with even to this day?
Well, I know one thing for sure. It only could have turned out better.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So that's the public universal friend and intersex dual being Christian God
Wow.
right here in America. So,
I did
about
not
it?
know that. That's really fascinating.
yeah, crazy story, huh?
Well, thanks for that,
I like
Uncle
it.
Mark.
Yeah.
I like it.
There you go.
We need more women and non-binary and non-male people starting religions, but they just really need to let their people fuck.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just one little
just-
hurdle to get over, ladies.
You can't keep a religion going if they're not reproducing. So
There you go.
learn the lesson.
There you go.
ladies.
So happy Pride. There's queer stories everywhere. We just have to look.
Let's move on.
Woohoo!